In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to paint a sunset seascape using Corel Painter 2015. If you'd like to follow along with me, you can download my Corel Painter workspace. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a new canvas by clicking New, and I'm going to choose a preset of 11 by 14 at 300 dpi, but you could use any size canvas that you want. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill the sky, or the canvas layer. I'm just going to click on Fill, and I'm going to hunt for the color that I want. I think I want a kind of bright orange like this. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call that C. I'm going to select the rectangular selection tool, and this is going to help me define my horizon and keep it straight. So I'm not going to go right down the center. I'm going to go slightly below center. You want to start your selection outside the canvas and end it outside the canvas to make sure that you get a selection of the whole canvas here. And let's pick a blue color, kind of a blue-green. Let's do something like this for now, and let's go ahead and fill again. We'll click OK to keep that. You can select None to deselect that selection. Let's create another layer. Let's move it below the C, and let's call it Hills. Let's make that a composite method of multiply, and we'll select black. The brush we want to select is the mountain knife, and you want to use a medium-sized brush. Go ahead and paint with the edge of the brush. Now, if you're having trouble getting this to work, you may have to tilt your pen in a different direction. I'm keeping my pen pretty upright. You may have to paint over it a few times to darken it. Make sure it's filled in pretty dark here, and make sure the edges look the way you want them to. If you paint too much, you can always select the eraser and erase part of it. I think we want to give this a sense of perspective, so I'm going to shave this a little bit and select the mountain knife and just go over that part where it's smooth looking to make it jagged, and then I'm going to just make sure that everything gets a little bit smaller near the horizon. That'll give it a sense of perspective. So the next thing we'll do is we'll establish our shoreline. Let's create a layer at the top of the layers. Let's call it sand. Let's select the airbrush, and we can select a sand color, which will be kind of a tan brown like this. I'm going to use kind of a big brush here and paint, and I'm going to paint in this nice gradient. So we want our sand to kind of fade into our water a little bit, like so. And we want our shoreline to be at an angle to give us a sense of perspective. Next, we'll add some shading to the sky. So we'll go to the canvas layer that contains our sky, and let's use that same airbrush. Let's choose a dark red like this. Let's go ahead and paint right along the horizon to darken the horizon. We're going to have it fade from orange to red. We'll shift the hue a little bit more towards red, and we'll paint with a smaller brush right along the horizon. So we get something like this. Let's go ahead and sample a lighter orange color like this. Let's put in some of that right around the center. Let's shift it towards yellow a little bit more and put in some of that. We're going to have our sun right around here, kind of in the center of the composition, so that area will be the lightest overall. We can go ahead and shift the hue towards yellow a little more and lighten it a little bit. We'll put in a nice bright area here right in the center, and we'll just add a little bit more yellow here in the middle just to brighten it a bit. Let's shift to a kind of violet color like this. Let's put in some of that near the top and have it kind of fade into that yellow. Let's switch to blue, kind of a cyan blue, and let's put in some of that. Just a few hints in a couple of places just to add some flavor to the sky. Let's pick a bright magenta. Let's use a little bit of that. Now our sky really has some flavor here. Let's go ahead and blend it a little bit using the coarse oily blender. You'll want to make sure that your paper settings are like what I have here. I have basic paper selected, and I have the paper scale and contrast cranked way up. And if you do that, you'll get a nice painterly result when you blend. Just go ahead and just mix this up. This is going to make it look like very distant clouds. And then we'll select the diffuse blur. We'll use a bigger brush, and we will use light pressure, and we'll go ahead and just stir up some of this to blend it. So I'm using light pressure as I blend so that I don't remove all of that sharpness and detail, but I soften it just a little bit. In a few places you can press down a little bit harder to soften it more. You want there to be a nice balance of sharp and smooth detail here. It's up to you to decide how much you want to add of each. Let's go ahead and add some ripples to this water here. So we'll click on the sea layer. We'll choose select layer content from the shortcut up here. That puts the selection around the sea layer. We'll choose show hide marquee to hide the selection while still keeping it active. And we'll create a new layer and we'll call this sea ripples. We want to change this to a composite method of multiply. And the brush we want to use is under the nozzle libraries. And we want to look in the nature category for waves. Waves suggest that we use linear size P for our brush. We'll choose that down here in image hose. That's the LSP brush. And if we do a test stroke with this, you're going to get something like this. This makes nice waves if you build it up in the right way. So the trick is to paint in perspective. You want to use a smaller brush in the background and start from the background and move towards the foreground and increase your brush size. For this particular piece, we want to paint in perspective, and we have this perspective point that kind of goes off here towards the corner. So we're going to go ahead and leverage that. So I'm just going to paint back and forth here in the background. Make sure you cover up all the gaps. Then I'm going to increase my brush size. I'm going to paint a little more. And go ahead and go all the way up to the shoreline here. And if you have any areas that are too dark or too light, you can always tap over them to add a couple little ripples here and there. But for the most part, you want to paint from the background to the foreground to make sure that everything's layered properly. Let's go ahead and add a mask to this layer. And with the mask selected, select black and the airbrush. We'll go ahead and paint near the horizon here to just lighten this a little bit and have it kind of fade down towards the bottom. We'll go to the sea layer and we'll turn on preserve transparency. We'll go ahead and choose select none to clear that selection that was active. And we can start adding some color to our water. So let's go ahead and pick a darker blue like this. And we'll use the airbrush to go ahead and darken the foreground a bit and darken the edges. We want the area where the sun is to be the lightest, so we want to vignette everything around that. Could even throw in some kind of teal colors here towards the corners to give it a little bit of variety. And then let's sample this pink color from the sky. Add a little bit of that near the light source and near the horizon. Let's sample this yellow color and do the same right where our sun would be. And we'll put a little orange in there too, why not? And once we have something like that, we're looking pretty good. Now you can return to the sea ripples layer and you can turn down the opacity to find whatever kind of blend you want. If you want more subtle water, you can do something like that. Or if you want more choppy water, you can really turn it up. I'm going to go with something maybe kind of like this here. Let's go ahead and turn off preserve transparency and let's add a layer at the top of the layers palette. Let's call this foam. We'll make this a screen composite method. And the brush that we'll use for this is the waves brush again. So go ahead and select linear size P in the image hose palette. And we'll go ahead and paint from our perspective point towards the foreground to paint in some foam. Now you can put this in however you want. I'm going to do something kind of like this. Add in a few little trails that kind of go into the water and onto the shoreline. Using firmer pressure will get you thicker blobs, and using thinner pressure will get you thinner blobs, and you really want to try to vary that so you get a nice natural effect here. Something like that looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and add a mask to that foam layer. We'll select black. We'll choose the airbrush, and we'll go ahead and mask out the edge of this foam that's connected to the water here a little bit, just to smooth out the transition. Let's go ahead and apply that layer mask by right-clicking on the mask and choosing Apply Layer Mask. And then on that same layer, we'll go ahead and return to the linear size P brush, and we'll tap in a few more lighter areas here and there, just to have a few that kind of pop out a little bit more. Let's add some ripples to the sand. We'll click on the sand layer. We will get a selection from that layer by clicking on Select Layer Content. We'll hide the selection by clicking Show Hide Marquee. We'll create a new layer and we'll call this Sand Ripples. This will be a multiply composite method. The brush that we'll use is called Ripples. And the brush that we want to use is linear size P angle D. And we'll do a test stroke. You should get something like this where your ripples build up, kind of like your waves did. You want to make sure that the light's on the right side, so our light's coming from here, so our highlight on our ripples should be on this side as well. And it is if we do a stroke this way. If we do the opposite stroke, our light's on the other side and then it doesn't look right. So following the same principles we used for our waves, we'll go ahead and make some ripples. So we're going to start in the background and move towards the foreground with overlapping strokes. And you can vary your pressure to get some different results, but again, you want these to build up and overlap. You want to use firmer pressure in the foreground so that your ripples are bigger in the foreground, and then use less pressure as you move towards the background. Let's go ahead and add a mask to that layer as well, and we'll select black and the airbrush, and now we can mask out a little bit of this. So where it starts to meet the shoreline here, we'll have it be a little smoother, and then as it gets closer to the beach, we'll have it get a little lumpier like so. And in a few places here and there with a smaller brush, we can break it down a little bit more like that. And we get a more natural effect that way. Let's add some texture on a new layer. We'll create a new layer, we'll call it texture. This will be a multiply composite method. We'll use the sponge and we'll select a dark brown color like so. Again, you want to paint in perspective, so in the background use a smaller brush, and in the foreground make your brush larger. You can vary the opacity of that layer to get a nice blend. I think something like that looks good. Let's create some sand grains on a new layer. We'll call it grains. We use the pixel brush for this, and we'll select a lighter sand color. Let's go ahead and paint over the whole sand area here. We'll select a lighter color, shift it towards orange a little more, and right where the sun is, put in some lighter pixels. Let's select the pepper brush. We'll set the feature to 2, and we'll click with the mouse because this works a little bit better. We'll just click in a few lighter pixels around here. And we'll darken our color a little bit. Put in some darker pixels. Now it's not going to look like I did much from far away, but if we zoom in, you can see you get this really nice sand texture pretty easily. If you want, you can play with the opacity of that to kind of blend it in a little bit more. I think I will, to right about there. Let's add a few more little foamy details to the shoreline here. We'll create a second layer, and we'll call it Foam 2, just to make sure we don't mess up what we've already done here that we like. And the brush that we'll use is the smooth palette knife. And you'll want to choose a light purple that kind of matches your sky. Make our brush a little bit bigger, and if you vary your pressure, you should get a nice result like this. We'll draw in a few little foam patterns and things here just to add some more detail. Just little squiggly lines. And we'll go ahead and add a mask to that layer. We'll select black and the airbrush. And we'll go ahead and mask that edge out just a little bit to blend it in. Let's go ahead and put in our sun now. We can do that on a layer on top of all the other layers, and we'll call it sun. This will be a screen composite method. We'll use the glow brush this time, and we'll select a yellow color, kind of a dark yellow like this. And we'll use a brush that's slightly bigger than our sun's going to be. Let's paint in a tight circle and see what we get. If you get something like that that has a nice yellow halo and the center doesn't build up to white too fast, then you're looking good. If it's building up to white too fast, you need to pick a darker yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and put my sun in right around here. I'll go ahead and use a smaller brush to put in a few little yellow details to make the sun look like it's peeking through the clouds here. Make my brush slightly larger to make a nice glow on it. I think that looks pretty good for our sun for now. Let's add some clouds to the sky. Now that we know where our sun's at, it'll be easy to put these clouds in because they're going to need to reflect the sunlight. So we can go back down to the bottom of our layers, to this canvas layer, and we'll create a new layer above that. Let's call this Clouds Light. We'll make this a screen composite method, and let's select kind of a magenta color like this. We'll make it a little more towards red here. Let's select the jitter airbrush. Use a medium-sized brush and see what you get. We want something kind of like that, but I think maybe instead of pink, this is what we want, kind of a peach color. So I'm picking an orange, and since it's set to screen, it's kind of brightening what's underneath it. So we'll go ahead and just add a little bit of that to just make the sky look kind of foggy and misty here and there. Let's create another layer. Let's call this Clouds Dark. And just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and use this Waves brush again. Let's select the linear size P brush, and you'd be surprised that you can actually get some pretty nice looking clouds. Now, as is, they're not really going to work. We'll have to color them the color of clouds, but for now we can get the shapes down. So I'm going to do just kind of short, quick taps to put in some cloud shapes like this. Near the horizon, I'm going to use a thinner brush so that my clouds are thinner. And I think something like that will work. Now, to give these clouds color, what we're going to want to do is choose Select Layer Content to put a selection around them. We'll create a new layer, and we'll call this Clouds Color. This will be a multiply composite method. We'll go ahead and hide this selection, and we'll choose a red color that matches our sky. We'll go ahead and choose Fill. Now, if that's not the right color, you can go ahead and hunt for a color that you like better. I'm going to go with something like that, maybe a little bit more towards red-orange. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to click OK. Now let's return to the Clouds Dark layer, and let's turn down the opacity of that layer, and that will remove some of that contrast. So we want very little contrast, maybe something like that will work pretty well. Let's go ahead and deactivate our selection by clicking Select None, and then we want to merge these cloud layers down with the sky. So what we want to do is we want to go to the Clouds Light layer, and we want to go to Layers, Drop. I want to go to the Clouds Dark layer and do the same. And the same for Clouds Color. This ensures that all of those layers drop down to the canvas and merge with the sky, and there isn't any issue with the composite method changing. Now we can go ahead and blend all this together if we want. Let's go ahead and use the diffuse blur, and we want to soften the edges of these clouds so that they blend into the sky. Don't want to blend them too hard, you'll blend out all your detail though. Let's add a new layer, and let's call it Clouds Glow. This will be a screen composite method, and we'll choose a dark yellow. We'll choose the glow brush. And what we want to do is paint right along the edges of some of these clouds where they're facing towards the light, just to give them a little bit of a glow, like the sunlight's reflecting off the underside of them. That'll help them look a lot more natural. Something like that is what we want. And you can use a bigger brush to put in a little more of a glow. Let's switch our hue to orange, pick kind of a brighter orange, and in a couple places here and there, we'll just brighten a couple of these clouds. Now we have a little variety in our sky. Let's go ahead and go to Layers, and we will drop that layer, and then we can go ahead and blend using Diffuse Blur. I'm going to blend out a little more of this detail in my clouds here. So I want them just to look a little softer. Let's create a layer below the sun layer, and let's call it Sparkle. This will be the sun sparkling off of the water, so we'll go ahead and make this a screen composite method. We'll choose a dark orange and the glow brush. We'll use a small brush, and we'll go ahead and right underneath the sun, just put in some little shapes, kind of using little dots and short little horizontal lines, like so. This will be the reflection of the sun off the water. It helps if you look for areas that are light areas on your waves and put the highlights on those rather than on the shadow areas. I'm trying to go vertically right under the sun here. We'll use a bigger brush and paint over a few of those areas to really make them glow. And you could go ahead and use a bigger brush to put in a little bit of glow kind of straight down from the sun, so it looks like the light's kind of beaming straight down onto the water like that. And go ahead and paint over that reflection a little bit more. Now it really glows. And go ahead and put in a few more spots just to kind of bring this together a little more. Let's turn on preserve transparency and pick a yellow color like this. We'll use the airbrush. We'll go ahead and paint over some of this area here towards the bottom just to shift the hue a little bit towards yellow. And we'll select a red and we'll paint near the horizon to make that a little more red. Now we have a nice gradient in our reflection here. Now let's go ahead and save a copy of our artwork because we're going to flatten all our layers and do some blending. So we'll go to Save As and we'll save a copy. Next we'll go to Drop All to drop all our layers down to a single layer. Now we can start blending some of the background because the hills and the horizon line are way too sharp. So we're going to use the blur blender for that. We'll go ahead and start with the hills. Let's blur over those, just paint back and forth, just over that sharp edge with firm pressure. You have to go over it a few times to really blur it. Next we'll go ahead and paint over the horizon line. Soften that a little bit. Set it into the distance. Next we'll select the diffuse blur. Now you want to paint with very gentle horizontal strokes and try not to paint vertically or you're going to disturb your nice straight line. Just paint right along some of this water here to smooth it out just a little bit in the background. Very gentle strokes. And anywhere else you see that you want to blend, you can blend. I might blend some of the sun a little bit here. And then I might go ahead and blend along the edge of the mountains a little bit to soften them a little bit more. And then to give this a more dramatic effect, let's add a vignette. We'll create a new layer and call it vignette. This will be a multiply composite method. We'll choose a violet color, kind of like this. We'll go ahead and click fill. And we'll use the airbrush along with white and a very large brush to go ahead and paint away some of this vignette. Now we have a nice dramatic effect. You can reduce that using the layer opacity. Let's go ahead and choose drop all again, and then we'll choose select all, copy, and paste in place. That'll create a duplicate of our artwork. And with that duplicate, we'll go ahead and apply an equalize setting to balance out the light and dark a little bit. We'll click on Effects, Tonal Control, Equalize. Go ahead and click on Auto Set. I think that overdoes it a little bit, but that's okay. We'll click on OK, and we'll reduce the opacity of that layer to something that we like. If you do it before and after, you can see that it's just brightening it up a little bit so that if we do make a print, it's not going to come out too dark. We'll go ahead and choose Drop All. And the last thing that we'll do is we'll add some canvas texture, and that's a lot easier to do in Corel Painter 2015 compared to previous versions. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a new layer and we'll call it Texture. We'll select this number 5 gray value here, and we'll fill the canvas with that color. We'll change the composite method to overlay. That makes that gray disappear, but if we add texture, the texture will still show up. So you can pick your paper texture here, or if you want, you can go ahead and go to Effects, Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture, and now in Painter 2015 you can access your paper from here, and that's really handy. So I'm going to go ahead and go with this gessoed canvas. I'm going to reduce the amount a little bit. Then I'm going to click OK. Now this texture doesn't look good as is. We need to modify it a little bit to make it look more organic. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a mask. We're going to select black, and we're going to use the sponge to mask away some of this texture. So I'm going to paint over this with this brush several times using very firm pressure. And this is going to eat away at that texture and remove some of it. This is important because on a traditional canvas, the texture wouldn't be so even. Now if you look at it up close and from far away, you get a much better result. Now you will notice that at these different levels of zoom, you get more or less of this checkered pattern. Don't worry about this. This is just an effect of the image being on your computer screen. If you were to print this full size, you wouldn't see that checker pattern. Let's go ahead and apply this layer mask by right-clicking on it and choosing Apply Layer Mask. And let's add another layer of texture. Let's call it Texture 2. Fill it with that same gray color. And change the composite method to Overlay. And then go ahead and choose a different paper texture this time. I'm going to use the worn pavement. And I'm going to go to Effects, Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture to apply my second layer of texture. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to create a mask for that layer. Select black again. And I'm going to use the sponge to subtract from that texture a little bit. So I'm just going to paint over it, several times to remove some of that texture. That'll just help it look a lot more natural. Now the beauty is that these are on their own layers, so you could turn them off if you don't like them, or you could reduce the opacity if they're too strong. I'm going to reduce the opacity on both these a little bit. And as the final cherry on top, let's add a little bit of a color tint to the whole piece. We'll create a new layer, we'll call it tint. We'll make the composite method overlay. And let's choose a bright orange, kind of like this. We'll go ahead and go to fill. And we can reduce the opacity of that till we get just a little bit of flavor. It just warms up the piece overall. So there you go, we have a finished seascape. If you enjoyed watching me paint, take a quick second to like this video and share it with your friends on YouTube and on Facebook. And don't forget to click the subscribe button to see my new videos as I release them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.